We're here, Chairman.
Oh, no, that's fine. Thank
you. We're here, Principal. We're here.
We're here, very consistent.
Do we have
unlike others?
Do we have the department here, member, also already with that team?
Yes, Chairperson.
Oh, no, that's fine. Then let's go on into the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. This is the meeting of the Provincial Treasury Portfolio Committee with the Department of Provincial Treasury. It's an oversight meeting where we are looking at progress report and quarter performance of the department for the year 2021-2022. So we thank you everyone for coming from the legislature, honorable members, and from the department, honorable Squadi and HOD Brad, and the team from Provincial Treasury. All of you are welcome to the meeting. The agenda is in front of us. Let's go into it. And because there are no any other items, we go straight to item 2. In this meeting, as you have requested HOD Brat and MEC Squati, we want to spend as little time as possible so that we don't deal with issues that will eat our time, that are not critical for today's meeting, if you get the point. So let's focus on the issues that are critical for today's meeting, and then we go through those. And we want to spend as little time as possible. We hope that you will also be time conscious so that we are able to arrive at item 3, where if we have questions and comments, we make them, then we close the meeting. Then with those few words, I hand over to you, Honorable MEC Squati SC and the HOD Brad.
Thank you, Honorable Pala, Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee, and the members of the Portfolio Committee, my colleagues, HOD Brad, and colleagues from the department. Let me, Chairperson, start off by thanking you for this opportunity to come and appear before the Portfolio Committee in order to acquaint but also give progress in terms of some of the resolutions, but also the second quarter and unauthorized expenditure bill, so that the committee is able to be able to say to us what is it that needs to happen from here. And once again, Chair, as you have already remarked, that we do not necessarily have a lot of time today. We are also supposed to be having a sitting in the afternoon, but also that there are other commitments that might need all of us as members of the legislature. Without a waste of time, I would then request HOD Pratt to lead us on the progress report as requested, Chair. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, I think HOD is muted.
Apologies, thank you. Apologies, Chair, and welcome, and thanks very much, and thanks to MEC, and good morning to the Honourable Chair and Honourable Members. Apologies, I was speaking to myself there. I trust you can see the presentation. It's just the report that was circulated, and I'll just try and talk to it rather than read it. I think the first issue is around the recovery of our VBS monies that have lost, and we can only report back, sadly, that only the amount that we know of that's been recovered was at Ilyas Mutsaledi, about 48,000. That's the MM paid back. But no other municipalities have yet recovered anything. Obviously, they're also waiting for the liquidators. They have lodged claims with the liquidators, but no progress today. And then also on the SAPS cases, the municipalities have opened cases with SAPS, and the municipalities are listed there, basically all of them, but no progress on that matter yet, Chair. The next one was around the SEM issues. And really, it's again coming to consequence management around implementation issues. And it does make it difficult for us because that's really left to the accounting officers to act and institute those consequence management issues within departments based on both AG's findings and our own findings from internal audit and the transversal units. We do follow up, but I think we sort of hitting our head against a brick wall here, and we'll discuss that later when we come to the forensic report follow-up also. But we certainly persevering and trying to ensure that that happens. Even now with the regular expenditure condonement process, we don't condone unless there are consequences that have been provided to us as evidence. So hopefully that will also start sending the right message. And I think now with the AG's amendment to the Act, hopefully HODs will also take that a bit more seriously. On the consolidations, AG is still busy with 10-11, and it's really been a bit difficult the last 2 years with the COVID issues. All our audits have been delayed, and then even the municipal audit started late again. So the team that's meant to be helping us has been pulled back onto the audits of our departments and our entities. And that has delayed this, but there is one person now trying to work on this from AG's office, and they have finalized their findings for the 11 and 12, and we're busy responding to those to then have a final audit report for us then to move to the next year. 12 and 13 we finalized, but as we say, we're just waiting for those amendments that they might need us to process and then update them and submit again. In terms of what we've put in place, as I say, we're busy in finalizing. We have updated the 12 and 13 consolidations, but just waiting for that final report then to submit the next set to AG for audit. We've also will then finalize the subsequent year, so we need the 1 year to move to the next year. We're also looking at trying to now capture the revenue fund issues into BAS so that this is not a sort of back capturing situation that we've had with the backlog that we do have at the moment. We've also engaged with National Treasury in that the consolidation templates are not available. They've moved into a electronic system now. And we've asked for permission to participate in that system, and then for the service provider to open up for us for those old years, if I can call them that, to catch up. Otherwise, we'll never catch up because they don't have templates for the subsequent years, and we've got to get access to that system. We have applied, we're just waiting for the DG National to either give us permission or advise otherwise. In public entities, again, pretty much the same. They're still busy with the 13-14 audit, and we're waiting the audit report there. And similarly, we need the system now for us to be able to consolidate and not use Excel templates as previously. And that request has again been made to National. On the RFID project in sport, this is a concern and a high risk for us that we're trying to deal with, Chair. As you know, the system owner of board has been liquidated. Board is the system that we use that was brought in by Section 100. the asset management system through PwC, who then sold it on to a company called Combined Systems, which is part of the EOH stable. And they've liquidated that company. However, we did get permission from the liquidator to continue using the system, but it does limit us in making any improvements in terms of the controls around the system, as we don't have the intellectual property to that. But we can report that the system has been loaded onto our CETA servers in the province, so it's housed by us, but we're not the owners of the system, and fortunately the liquidator allowed us to continue using it. The challenge we have now is that the barcodes for that RFID system, which is a radio frequency identification system, where you can walk into a room and scan a whole library in a couple of seconds through this radio frequency, it needs a special barcode. And those barcodes are the challenge now, in that we don't have additional barcodes to barcode some of the latest procurements that have happened in sport. So what we did is we used the normal barcodes that we use for our normal assets and barcoded them, the books accordingly, and then had to have a manual register for those assets, which we then combined and submitted as an addendum to AG for audit. We're glad to report that Sports did manage to retain the unqualified audit, and there weren't findings on the asset register, but it is becoming a risk now. We are currently looking at where we can buy these tags that are compatible with the board system, and also engaging with the liquidator at the moment to see how we can address that. So it is a risk for us, Chair. Noting that that company now is in liquidation, we've started engagements with National Treasury to migrate the board asset registers to the National Treasury Logos asset system. That's the national system that's there. They've made quite substantial improvements to that system now also, where you can scan. Previously, you couldn't scan and you had to do manual verifications. So that system is certainly been upgraded, and then we'll develop a process plan to transition from board to Logos. But our plan is to complete this current audit still on board. And once we've then got the green light in terms of the asset audits, that we then move that asset register as opening balance into Logos. National Treasury has also committed to provide us with some human capacity to help us with that, but not on a full-time basis. So the plan is being developed, Chair, and hopefully that will then secure our assets until doomsday. For now, we are at risk, but we're trying to manage that going forward. Unfortunately, the liquidator seems to be playing game with us. The next issue is around improving spending on conditional grants and infrastructure. We'll talk to the conditional grants in a later question, Chair, if I can focus here on the infrastructure one. As of September, we stood at around 36% or 2.557 billion of our 7.023 billion budget. On a straight line, we should have been around 50%, but based on the actual projections provided by departments, we should have spent around 3.467 billion or 49%. So we're trying to steer away from purely a straight line projection, as we know that infrastructure projects have got different cycles. But based on the projections, it almost ended back at 50% from the infrastructure units. So we're about 13% down from where we should have been and 14% down from a straight line, which is about 910 million rand. Noting that when we picked that up in the first quarter, we then, through the infrastructure cluster committee, were directed to establish a technical committee to accelerate these projects and programs. Our concern was that a lot of the projects were at pre-construction stages, amount of about R1 billion. And obviously those wouldn't get to construction in this year, in that they then had design and feasibilities and all those sort of issues. And the task was then to try and improve that. We move 60% of that R1 billion into construction stages, so that we get all these pre-construction projects into the construction phase at least. But as of September, we've only managed to get 272 million out of that pre-construction into construction. At least it's an improvement, but it's only 30% of our 60%, the target that we set. So 300, let's call it 300 million of the 600 million. But we continue to work with our departments on that, and obviously monitoring that very closely as a Treasury and the cluster committees. And as I said, we'll talk to the conditional grant spending in more detail in another question. On the RT27, which is the National Treasury's debt collection tender that's been put out or is available, our departments are now starting to partake in that. Department of Health is fully participant, and their debt collection has increased by about 80%, Chair. So we're certainly seeing that dedicated legal teams now chasing up on these debts. We're starting to see our revenue coming in. And certainly we've seen a spike in the revenue collections in terms of our provincial revenue in health. Some of our departments are still finalizing their participation in this contract, and we're making follow-ups on that to make sure that everyone that has got debts that need action are partaking. In terms of our entities, GAL and LEADER have now started, and we've seen that in LEADER also the debts are starting to come in, while at a slower pace than health, but certainly we've seen an improvement, and that tender is certainly assisting us. So we don't now rely on state attorney, which sometimes are not committed to this project. So there's certain deliveries and deliverables in the contracts we sign with all these collection firms, and they also only get paid based on the collections that they make. Then on the contract management framework, we can report that that framework has been finalized and signed off. We're busy rolling out the strategy, but in the same time, we're developing what we call a standard operating procedure for that contract management strategy, which is a very detailed step-by-step plan or process, giving responsibilities to various people within the supply chain issues when it comes to contract management. And as soon as those are done, they'll also be rolled out to our department. So we're busy with that at the moment. And I think that will also strengthen then our contract management. We also got various templates that is part of the standard operating procedure, some draft, dummy contracts for smaller procurement, some for more complex procurement, and obviously for infrastructure procurement. So we hope that that will help, and also a template on a contract register with the details that we want in the register, and also a contract file, what should be contained in that file for audit purposes to make sure that documents don't disappear. And it will also include scanning of those documents, so that if someone does misappropriate a file, that we've always got the electronic copy. So that's been rolled out now, Chair, and we trust that will help. Then on the support offered to departments in terms of the audit qualifications, just at a high level, Chair, we had quite significant improvements in 1920, and we only had one department, the Department of Education, being qualified, and GAL in the entities. We have developed what's known as the audit action plans, and we review them as Treasury and monitor implementation thereof through ourselves and our cluster audit committees to ensure there is improvement. In that cycle, in the 2021 cycle, the audits that have just been completed, we've now recorded 5 clean audits, with LEADER joining the clean audit institutions. But unfortunately, the legislature lost its clean audit due to quite a technical argument, and certainly we of the view that they will return to clean audit next year. It was a very technical GRAP issue that was picked up by AG that's been there all the years, but now picked up in this year. So we're dealing with that. The other institutions that retained their clean audits was Office of Premier, Treasury, Transport and Community Safety, and Gambling Board. But despite that, Chair, it's unfortunate that we need to report that we did see a regression in the Department of Health particularly. that moved from a unqualified to qualified. Again, it's a very small issue around an asset that could not be satisfactorily resolved for the AG. They are busy disputing the report, which we as Treasury are not supporting, but they are taking it up to a national level now. Education still remained qualified, and then unfortunately LIDA regressed due to the Limpopo connection that had a qualification, and that affected the group LIDA. LIDA itself as a company was fine, but because of the materiality of the Limpopo connection, which also related to the asset disclosure, which was fixed subsequently, but AG was not of the view to go back and re-audit that register, so it then had a negative impact on LIDA. Our other ICU case is GAL Chair. They've actually regressed from qualified to adverse, and there we've certainly seen a regression in terms of GRAP understandings, and also lack of leadership. As you may be aware, the CEO was suspended, the CFO left the entity, and there was just no management left there. We did try and intervene in terms of the financials, but without the institutional knowledge of what exactly goes on there, it is difficult to come in at a late stage to assist. But we are at the moment, we will be going in at GAL to address all these adverse issues and also have an interim audit before we get to the 31st of May to make sure that we can get AG's views on our improvements and clear the previous year's issues. So we will be meeting with GAL. We're also meeting with LIDA. Our concern in LIDA is that there are certain, can I say, smaller subsidiaries that just never seem to get to clean. There's always unqualified, but not clean. And our concern and what we want to focus on is to understand why those smaller subsidiaries don't get clean. And we're working on that also. We will be focusing on education. Education just had two matters. One is the irregular expenditure, which we've got a task team, can I say a multi-departmental task team headed by Treasury, and we've certainly seen clarity now being provided on those irregular expenditures. And in fact, we've managed to clear quite a substantial amount now with a clearer understanding of what AG found as irregular, and some of them are being written back as not being irregular. So I think with this dedicated team, we're starting to see progress there. In health, it was an asset issue which was actually sorted already, but we will still go in there. So in education, it was two issues, the regular and the commitments on their contracts, which AG could not satisfy themselves on the completeness. And it's about missing records, and we also got a team that's looking at that now, Chair. So hopefully we can get education to join the unqualified audits in next year. So we're getting a dedicated support to those four entities. In our municipal support around the debts, this is a COXTA function, but we as Treasury are part of the debt forum, or the Provincial Municipal Debt Forum. And we're certainly starting to see some traction now and reconciliation between our municipalities and public works. And in fact, in this adjustment budget, we are providing a substantial amount to clear some of the debts that are there that have been reconciled. Just for your information, for example, in Makuru-Tamaga, about 140 million is being made available to clear the debt in Makuru-Tamaga, and that's been reconciled, and about 126 million for other municipalities. So as these debts are reconciled, we then making funds available to public works to settle these long outstanding debts. We've also instructed public works to give us a full list of each municipality or each property that we have and what the rates and taxes are to establish a proper baseline going forward and budget for that, and obviously ring fence that as budgeted in the appropriation, so that we don't end up with this arrears that we do have currently. And we trust that once we've got that baseline, we'll have a better sense of what exactly is needed, and not just, may I call it, a thumbsuck figure. So the list should be provided to us by the end of this month. In fact, it was due on Friday, and we'll make follow-up on that. On the weak admin systems, on internal control policies and procedures, again, Chair, we've developed standard operating procedures, as I was discussing now, for contract management. We've done that for supply chain, and they are there and published. We then monitor compliance to that through our transversal teams and internal audit. But it's really non-compliance is for accounting officers to correct. We can just keep reporting the non-compliance, and it comes back to consequence management, that they need to take actions and make sure. From internal audit's perspective, when they review the controls, they find them to be adequate but ineffective, meaning that departments are sidestepping the controls, and that results in the non-compliances, and we're trying to see how to deal with that. Unfortunately, our supply chain is a very manual process, and I think once National Treasury, I know they're working on a system to make this more electronic, and those controls will then be enforced through the electronic system and eliminate the manual sort of processes and breakdowns that then happen. In terms of our accounting authorities and consequence management, and I think, again, as I said, this is a problem, Chair, and we're just saying that it's within the powers of both accounting officers and accounting authorities through the various legislations to institute these consequence managements and report them to the legislature. In support, Provincial Treasury also writes follow-up letters to departments and entities to request and track progress on implementation, especially on our forensic investigations, Chair. But again, we're just not getting the cooperation that we'd wish to have, and we don't always have that information. Recently, we sent out letters for updates on the forensic reports, both to our municipalities and our departments, and we did not receive responses. So maybe we're appealing to the committee, if I may, to also assist us to bring these accounting officers to account in the various portfolio committees on their forensic reports. And I think in that way we might get a better support and maybe better implementation. Our powers are a bit limited. We can continuously follow up, but it's within them to implement those recommendations. And as I say, for now, we're not succeeding, and maybe the committee can advise on a way forward around that. We'll appreciate. I think that's basically the same issue here around our forensic reports. It is a frustration. The RAL report now is with us, the final report, and hopefully that will be submitted to RAL probably mid-December. We're just going through it now. It's quite a substantial report, I think over 300 pages that we need to go through and then submit that to RAL. The G&T pension fund audit, that report was submitted to the MEC and the board. Our finding there was not really material. Yes, there were delays in the payment of the funds from G&T to the pension fund administrators, but not that money disappeared. It was just paid a bit late. And I'm sure you might see in the press now that there's actually an advert to liquidate the G&T pension fund, and it looks like the members have supported that. So that put us in a bit of a difficult position in that if the members support it, the liquidator may well liquidate that fund, and then we will have an issue around especially the older colleagues will then take that money and spend it and not have pensions when they do actually leave the GNT. So I know the whistleblowers also lodged a complaint or objection rather with the liquidator, but we're not sure exactly where that process is. So those are the two reports that maybe the committee has not seen, but we have sent the GNT to the department and RAL, as I say, which is quite substantial. We're just quality checking that for final sign-off. Then on the conditional grants, as I said, Chair, we're facing a similar problem here as infrastructure. Our budget of 68.7 billion, about 10.5 billion of that, or 15%, is conditional grants and 58% is equal share. As at the end of September, it was reported that 4.2 billion, or 40% of the total budget of 10.5 was spent. Again, using a straight line, we should have been around 50%, so we're about 10% behind where we should have been. And we have identified challenges affecting these grants. And in fact, we've had a separate workshop where we've called all our departments to come and tell us exactly what their plans are and what the bottlenecks or challenges are so that we can try and assist and unblock it. This graph just gives us the spending trends month on month. This is cumulative, and you'll see their social development way ahead at 62%, so they're actually ahead of the straight line. Health around 45%, led it at 42%, but most of us are hovering just on the 40%, about 10% down. So we then had this meeting, as I said, to try and identify what is going on and how we can help, and that was on the 26th and 27th of October. But again, Chair, the quality of the reports that came were not of that quality that would help us to intervene. And we've then asked departments to go back and submit better quality reports, both for the short term, the catch-up, but more importantly also for the long term. What are the plans? We know what grants we're going to get every year. We know more or less what the funds are going to be. What are the plans in place to make sure that next year we're ready to spend come April? So the information, as I say, was not up to standard. We then wrote letters to the accounting officers, and they need to report back to us by or resubmit their reports to us. But we wanted the accounting officer now to sign off that plan to make sure that they take accountability for that, for us to move forward. So it's still, we're not that far behind the straight line, but it's still low, and we're trying to fast track that. But again, we need departments to play a game for us to be able to help them. On sound financial management and accountability and the prudent spending, I think, Chair, basically, we have various meetings with our departments over every month. We have the RYMs, which we also then submit to your Honourable Office, just to give you a status of where we are. We also have what we call bilateral meetings quarterly, where we actually interrogate the spending against the budgets, department by department, and MEC also chairs those meetings. But we've also got other meetings where we have in our supply chain, our asset management, our PTCF for the CFO forum. We've established a separate infrastructure technical management committee, which then reports to the technical cluster and ultimately to the political cluster. That's starting to show some improvement, but we can do so much. We also then, through our structures such as the audit committees, which we believe are functioning quite well, to also monitor our spending. And I think as a province, we've managed, even with this COVID, to stay within our baselines. We have not recorded any, can I say, unauthorized expenditure, except in public works, which was more within one program, but as a vote, they did not overspend, and I'm sure those reports will be tabled soon at the legislature. So from a purely prudent financial management perspective, Chair, I think we've done well. We've tried to contain the COE. That's certainly not been easy. In fact, it's been very difficult. And as we'll be tabling soon, our adjustment budget, which will also then give more clarity on that. But we can give the committee confidence that we will be able to see through this financial year with the budget that we then table as an adjustment budget. Our unwanted expenditures are also monitored through our governance monitoring and compliance unit. And as I say, we're starting to see a reduction now in the irregular expenditures. It has taken some time, but now that we as Treasury are actually moving in. But again, we had the liberty of departments to make sure that they investigate and they then implement their controls and consequence management to enable us to then consider those expenditures. As soon as there's an identification of a loss, we as Treasury cannot deal with that, and the accounting officer then needs to either create a debt or write off that money. So, Chair, I think let me pause there for this one. If I may then move to the quarterly report, unless you want to engage on this one first, Chair, I'll just take advice from you.
No. You know the procedure. You proceed with all the reports at your deep breath until you are done, and then we come in.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chair. I'll just share then just a very few slides on our. Sorry, it's not giving me. Just on our quarterly performance. As Chair can see. In the second quarter, our validated report, that's the one where we have got means of verification for all the achievements, and also then submit to the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation nationally. We have categorized our reports into those targets achieved, those partially achieved, and those not achieved. And the partially achieved targets are those where there is some progress but not fully achieved the target as set. So as a department, we had 23 targets set for the second quarter, of which we fully achieved 22. One target was not achieved, being in internal audit, and we'll just touch on that one target as we go through this report. Just to give some highlights on the per program, Chair. In program 1, we had one capacity building program was implemented as required. We also had the institutional arrangement report to Excom. 100% of our suppliers were paid within 30 days, and our financial statements were compiled and submitted on time. In program 2, we had one research document that was produced through our Provincial Fiscal Policy Unit. And we also had the assessment that was conducted to ensure the collection of the revenue targets. We had 3 consolidated provincial in-year monitoring reports, which we submitted in the month, each month submitted to National Treasury and the various oversight committees. We also had 27 infrastructure reporting model assessments. And as you know, there's a separate infrastructure reporting model, which then supplements the in-year monitoring report, and we then monitor that, and that's really what's helping us assess the infrastructure spending and trying to expedite that spending. Then we had one infrastructure assessment at the local government on the mixed spending, and 2 municipal governance structures were supported. In program 3, we conducted 16 provincial reports, all in asset management, cash, supply chain, and strategic procurement targets. So those were all met. And then in program 4, we had various, in fact, 23 training courses. We also assessed the financial statements for all our departments. We had 24 audit committees that we supported from the Treasury. And we then also dealt with all the irregular expenditure submissions that were brought to our desk for consideration, and some of them obviously reported or returned back to departments for further information. But those that come we have handled, and we had one assessment of our provincial risk profile, and then we also had an assessment of compliance to the public sector risk management framework in 16 of our institutions, and our financial system utilization was conducted in 11 departments. So on the internal audit one, Chair, the one that we did not achieve, it was basically 4 projects that in terms of the internal audit plans should have been completed. The reports were issued, but they were not yet signed off due to delays in the engagement with our departments, and for that reason we've recorded as partially achieved. And the reasons for that was in Department of Transport Safety, Community Safety rather. The officials were in quarantine for almost 3 weeks, and we could not engage with them by the end of the quarter. And then we did have some internal issues which we dealt with, Chair, in that one of our officials also then did not give us the cooperation we needed to conclude the audit. And the follow-up progress report was not submitted to internal audit by the department, but those have been dealt with subsequently, Chair, so that internal audit reports have been dealt with. So again, there were no targets that we didn't achieve at all, Chair, and I think I'll pause there on this one. The full report has obviously been submitted and is available if we need be. If I can then just move to the unauthorized spending, Chair, if I can find it. Chair, if you just allow me just to close some other things here, I think that. Apologies, Chair, I don't think I've got it open. Just want to quickly get it. Thanks, Chair. Apologies for that. This is the unauthorized bill that is with the legislature at the moment. It's gone to the Office of the Premier. We'll just touch on it very briefly. Basically, it deals with the former Department of Community Safety and Liaison, which incurred unauthorized expenditure of 202,000 Rand. And the issue there was really related to medical aid contributions that automatically increase, and the department did not have the budget to process those transactions. They were processed, but the budget was exceeded, and that we have recommended that be approved with funding, the 12,000. Then there was an amount of 190,000 which related to a disabled colleague that was appointed within the department. It was then identified that we needed an assistant to how do we put this nicely, to move the colleague around in that he could not on his own be transported, etc. So the department then had to appoint a support colleague to help this disabled person, which is allowed in terms of the public service regulations. But unfortunately, they did not budget for the appointment of this particular colleague, and they spent 190,000 for the 12 months. The disabled colleague did move on to another department subsequently in February 2018. So it was just for the, can I say, 11 months salary that was then not budgeted for, and AG found that to be unauthorized expenditure. Our proposal to the committee was, or to the legislature, is that this money be funded within the department's budget, that it be approved as it is allowed, and it was something that came about subsequent to the appointment of the disabled colleague, but just that they did not budget for that particular post, and AG then found that to be irregular. And our recommendation is that that be approved without funding in the department, and that they then deal with it within their own budget. Chair, I think that's really the short of that particular issue. We can report that disciplinary action was taken against the then CFO in terms of a written warning to make sure that budgets are available when appointments are made. I think the challenge that we have is that the then accounting officer is retired from the public service, but I think again that maybe this matter needs to be closed and approved with funding, without funding, sorry, if the committee then so agrees. Thanks, Chair. I think that brings me to the end.
Thank you very much, HOD Brad, for that presentation of the 3 items. Honorable members who are listening, I think, honorable members, in relation to that bill, which was tabled in the legislature by Honorable MEC Squadi some time ago in the course of the year, we should be able to pass it because it's as the HOD is explaining, it's straightforward. And because the Standing Committee on Public Accounts COPA has dealt with the substantive issues in that regard, we should table it in the House as we discussed last time and be able to pass it so that those monies that the HOD was mentioning are able to move as they should and is beyond us. That one is a bit straightforward, honorable members. I think in a sitting or two that are coming, should be able to take that forward. And HOD Brad and MEC Squadi, as we explained at the beginning, that and we always say, even in the debate in the House, as honorable members, that we are generally happy with the performance of Treasury internally. It is the best performing department in the provincial government and is one of the best performing provincial treasuries in the Republic of South Africa. But then even when earlier in the meeting, when we were looking at the second quarter performance, we were generally satisfied with their performance in the second quarter for this financial year. Where we usually take issue and raise a number of issues is in relation to the role of Treasury external of doing oversight over other departments, other entities, and other bodies in the province. That's why while we know that you don't run those entities or departments, but we usually raise issues there. So I will touch on some issues, and then those who are on deliberations allow members, if they have any questions or points they want to raise, then we will allow you to respond, and we will be done. We have not been looking forward to a long meeting, and we are not looking forward to holding anyone here or holding ourselves. In relation to GAL, HOD Brad, Gateway Airport Authority Limited, just go back to it and tell us if you have any information, because you are not running it actually, you are helping them on the financial side and accountability side, on what actually happened there in relation to their finances, particularly the collapse recently, and now that they are up, what actually happened in that important entity for the provincial government. And I think Honorable Squadi will touch, we are returning to these things again, Honorable Squadi will touch on the process in relation to way forward of that entity, whether it will continue to be in the provincial government or we're taking it to AXA or doing something about it, because it's not for the first time that we have challenges there. They have been happening over time. Number two is in relation to Great North Transport. We read in the papers recently, I think it's few weeks ago, that there was a challenge of a provident fund, and the newspapers were saying some amount of 300 million looks like unaccounted for, and that some staff members that work there, like drivers and others, passed away in the recent years, and there was no money available to help them at their homes, or even the Provident Fund was not available in any way to those workers that passed away or retired. Some retired actually even, and there was nothing we learned from reports in the papers. So let's get into that and know what exactly is happening there, and what are you doing from the financial side to help that entity. In relation to compensation of employees, what is the progress in the containment of that compensation of employees, HOD Pratt, so that we spend as much money as possible on infrastructure and others other than on salaries? So what is the progress there? In relation to containment also of contingent liabilities, what is the progress there? Have we made any improvements from the 13 billion of the previous year in relation to this? Conditional grant spending, I hear you talk about a meeting or a workshop or something of that kind that was held recently to fast track spending of conditional grant. How far are we making any progress in that regard? We were concerned when we saw some documents showing that we are one of the worst performing in some conditional grants in the Department of Education and elsewhere, that we are not spending them as we should. So what is are we making any progress there? Recently, the SIU, Special Investigation Unit, issued a statement saying that they are investigating 41 companies that procured PPE irregularly in the Department of Health, in the Limpopo provincial government. We hope that you are aware of that, because that was a public statement that they issued even in the presence of the Premier at the Premier's office. What is happening there with those 41 companies? What were the irregularities? What actually happened? And what measures are being taken to forestall that problem that happened there with the PPE irregularities that happened there, which the SIU says it found in our province? So those are my points, and I'm sure you will see HOD Pratt, as we say, they are external to you, and generally there are areas where you are helping other bodies as the Constitution expects you as a Provincial Treasury to do, and we're looking there on those other bodies external to you. Honorable members, if you have any points, this is the time to raise questions, comments, and any points that we want to raise. And then we'll allow HOD Pratt and MEC Squati and the team to respond. Honorable members. And because I actually don't see a single hand, I will then allow you, Honorable MEC Squati and HOD Pratt, to respond, and then we will round off the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. I'll allow the HOD, Mr. Gavin Pratt, to start, and I'll come towards the end. Thanks.
Thank you very much, MEC. And again, thanks very much, Chair. I appreciate the comments and questions. I'll try and talk to Gal. Chair, we really found that there was no financial management at Gal. With the CFO leaving, supply chain was vacant. We ultimately sent one of our supply chain colleagues to Gal just to keep what was there afloat. Gal was severely affected also by COVID, in that obviously the flights were grounded. But additional to that, as you know, their license was suspended for commercial flights. We can report that that now has been normalized. And again, because GAL didn't have any revenue being collected other than the rentals in the property area, they didn't have money to operate and to also implement the CAA findings. So they then used the money that was given to them for other purposes. But at least the CAA issues have been dealt with. I think there's one issue that's still outstanding around a signboard that needs to be moved, but we've got the license back. So at the moment, it's operating. Our challenge that we have is that there's still no permanent CEO or CFO. We have given them permission to appoint, but the challenge on the CEO post is that it's been challenged, the dismissal of the former CEO. So that post is still in suspension. The CFO post, I'm advised, has been advertised, Chair. So at the moment, we've got an acting CEO, that's someone from Transport, Mr. Moloto, that's just caretaking there. But the skill sets are not necessarily commensurate with what we need there, Chair. So as I said, we as Treasury, we've now implemented a CA training program in Treasury where we've now got 10 young potential chartered accountants. We took some of them and put them into GAL to help compile the financial statements, but it's very difficult to come in at a late stage and not have all the necessary records and background to what needs to be disclosed in terms of the operations. So the AG made quite a few findings on technical issues around generally recognized accounting practice. Our way forward now is to go back to the entity, in detail assess the AG's findings on those technical issues, rectify or get the documents to support what AG has found, and restate those financial statements. So we want to have an interim audit done probably in February, March, before we submit the end of March statements for audit on 31st of May, so that we can have a clean record going into the next audit. Otherwise, AG can quite easily disclaim GAL in that even the previous year's issues haven't been dealt with. So the Accountant General, and I'm not sure if she's here, Chair, because we've got audit committees today, but we will now in detail assess those management reports, not just the audit report, and rectify whatever needs to be rectified and get, that clean bill of health before we move into the next audit. So the financial challenges at GAL was certainly huge. And again, in the adjustment budget now, we are forced to give them additional money because their revenue just didn't come in, and that revenue was basically part of their budget to have the operations. And obviously they needed to stock up on jet fuel and get inventories in place. So it needed a bit of a cash injection, which we have now proposed through this adjustment budget. I think from a board perspective also, Chair, there's been so many changes in the board at GAL, and obviously different MECs have also come into transport. But I think the board that's now appointed is a technical, competent board with aviation experts in there. And we trust that the board, they are looking at the whole turnaround and they're starting with the financial issues. And we will give that support to the board. Whether GAL will stay as a public entity or not, Chair, our view and the reconfiguration findings are that GAL will probably need to stay as a separate entity. There is a suggestion that maybe it becomes a 3C and not a 3D, but that will be for the Premier then to take a decision based on the findings of the consultants. So at the moment, whether it's a 3D or 3C, it will remain. But there is a push to then get AXA in to operate the airport, if I can put it that way, to become the aviation operator within that particular Polokwane International Airport. I think the other issue that we're not really taking cognizance of is that GAL should be looking after all our airports, Chair. We often confuse the Polokwane International Airport with GAL. When we talk about GAL, we're talking about Polokwane International Airport. And that's also key for us now. For example, the Messina Mercado SEZ. What are we doing about getting flights to Messina? And what is GAL doing around that to then look at revenue streams, etc.? So I think, again, the board that's there now is probably more competent than we've had in the past, and we will give them support, but I think MEC can come in there. Chair, on the G&T pension fund, I think maybe it's been misreported. We did investigate that. The whistleblower brought the concern to the MEC Makone because Ledet is the shareholder, or through leader, obviously. We were then called in to facilitate a forensic report, which we did on behalf of Ledet. That report has been finalized. The challenge there, Chair, is that this pension fund has moved through 9 pension administrators in the time that has been alive as a consolidated. Remember, we had all the different former homelands that came into this pension fund. So when we looked for records, Chair, for payroll information, it's not there. You cannot get it unless you look at the recent period. Now, we then decided to go back, and I think it was to 2010. I don't know if Mr. Baklele is here now. So we said to the forensic auditors, go and look whether, in fact, the money that's been deducted from the payrolls is paid to the pension administrator. And we can report that in the report, it comes out that the money was paid, and we focused on the one administrator, the recent one, which was Alexander Forbes. The money was paid, but sometimes it was paid late due to the cash flow challenges, as we're all aware, with G&T and the financial issues they had. So it was not necessarily paid within the 7 days as required in terms of the Pension Fund Act. Some were paid on the 8th day, some on the 10th day, some 3 months later. But the money was paid, except we could not fully reconcile about 300,000 Rand, not 300 million. And that 300,000, the forensic auditors felt that it's not material to try and find that out of these hundreds of millions that have been paid into the pension fund. And we agreed with them because it will just cost us more money for them to go and try and look for something that we can't find. We know it's not there, we can't support it. So what they did is they took the payment records from G&T and went to the pension fund bank account with the administrator and matched payment for payment to make sure that what was deducted was paid over and was received by the pension fund ultimately. Yes, it was late, and I don't think that we can dispute. Then the liquidator, I don't quite know how this came about, Chair, but the members of the pension fund called for this fund to be liquidated. And it may be, and it's unfortunate, Chair, that at this time, because you've put money into the pension fund, it's not necessarily that it's going to grow. As you're aware, our markets are down. And that money that's in the pension fund and invested wherever they may have invested may not have given the return that was expected from the pensioners. So the pension funds that or payouts that they received is maybe not what they were expecting, and it was certainly down. And that's unfortunately the market forces that are there. So a lot of the pensioners were unhappy with, or the members rather, were unhappy with the returns they're getting on their pension fund, and maybe justifiably so. But we also found that the trustees of the pension fund, in other words, the employees or the trustees of that fund, failed in their duty also, Chair. And they did not do what they were meant to do. And there's other financial sector conduct authority compliance issues that we are looking at, and we've written letters to them to investigate, because they should have made sure that when they transfer from one pension fund administrator to the next, that process follows what they call a Section 14 certificate must be issued to confirm that all the money transferred from one to the other has been moved to the next administrator. So our big challenge now, Chair, is we cannot go back to 19 whatever, because we don't have records. And there's now a push for us to do further investigations on this matter, but we're saying we're not going to get any other opinion, if I can call it that. We will be spending money fruitlessly. So some of the, let's call it the 300,000, we could not trace, not to say that the money wasn't there, but we couldn't match it to the exact deposit in the bank account at the pension administrator. And you'll, just for your information, that this gets paid from each depot. So there's quite a lot, and the records are there, and it's in the report on how they've matched these issues. So it's true that I'm not aware that anyone wasn't paid out. It might be that they're not getting the money they think they should be getting, and maybe they're thinking that there's fraud in their pension fund. But again, they're part of the trustees of that pension fund. And that is a governance issue that obviously needs to be dealt with through LEDIT now. So Chair, we can go on, but it's really, we've basically closed this file. We've given the report to the MEC to give to the board to action. We can't condone what happened. In fact, we're saying that they should open a case, because if I may say, there's fraud there, because the money you take from the pensioners should be paid to the pension fund on time. And when you're not paying that money, that is classified as a fraudulent activity. And the report then makes those recommendations that cases need to be opened, not only against the CFO, the CEO, but the board also, because they failed in their fiduciary responsibilities as the board, as well as the trustees of that fund. We also had issues around the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, that our view is that they probably also failed in their own oversight responsibilities. But that's a bit beyond us, and I guess the report and the police, etc., will deal with that. Around the financial help to G&T, Chair, they have been in a very difficult position, and I'm sure you've read in the media that quite a few bus companies have actually closed shop. I'm aware of one of our Polokwane private bus companies that is also on their knees and might have to close shop. So we've looked at that. We have been presented with a turnaround plan, which is then monitored through MEC Makoni. And we're proposing to give additional funds to G&T in this adjustment budget. And basically the funds are to keep the wolves from the door, to pay the creditors, the diesel account, the tires account. In fact, they SARS around 40 million at that time. And SARS, again, to us, it's a fraud, because that's money you've taken from our employees and not paid over to the statutory body. But it is in a very difficult position, and we have advised accordingly. So we will be proposing an allocation to G&T, and hopefully through that also then get them back on their feet and be able to generate the revenue through the bus subsidies from transport. I can report that transport underspent their bus subsidies. Around 17 million was sent back to national in the last financial year and through this adjustment budget. So there is a challenge there, Chair. We're trying to assist. There are certain creditors that have already threatened judgment against them. There are one or two that are now worth threatening liquidation, and we have given them some comfort that money will be coming. And those that have really pushed our buttons hard, G&T, we've instructed them to pay them on those invoices that are payable, if I can put it that way. On the CRE containment, Chair, it's been very difficult. As you know, we were cut by just on 6 billion in this financial year, just on our compensation of employees. And we instituted those cuts accordingly. But it's very clear that education, because they carry such a large portion of our CRE budget and the provincial budget, that the cut there was astronomical, Chair. And unfortunately, what you cut was CRE, not necessarily in goods and services. So through the year, we've clearly seen that education's budget on CRE is way underfunded. In some other departments also, but to not such an extent, a couple of million here and there. But education was in excess of 2 billion rand projected shortfall, which we did quite a detailed analysis on. And we have to fund that through the second adjustment. Fortunately, National has made provision in the adjustment budget that was tabled by the Honourable Minister for each province to get some money to deal with the recently agreed to non-pensionable cash allowance, which we've paid off in September. And again, fortunately, as a province, we've had the cash flow to be able to do that. Some other provinces didn't have that cash flow and had to get an advance from National, and that really smacked of a Section 100 knocking on the door. But I think through our prudent financial management, we were able to honour the payments in September when it was implemented, and we're still able to honour those despite the budget will only come to us, as you know, probably November, December, once the whole process is completed. So the problem that we have now, Chair, is that a large portion of our adjustment is going to CRE. For example, 2 billion is going to education. In fact, to be honest, about 2.9 billion of our 6-odd billion adjustment is going to CRE. So it drops the denominator and it will push up our CRE spending, unfortunately, without us doing anything wrong. When we look at our numbers, they are managed, Chair. Our numbers have actually gone back to, I think it's 2006 levels. So our numbers are not the problem. It's the cost drivers that are the problem. And it's beyond us as a province to manage. Those decisions are made in another place and at another level. But I think as a province, we're managing that and we should see through this year. But it's certainly going to be tight. And even into the next year. As we sit now, we're around 68%, but every province is facing the same cuts, so they might also be, we're not going to show an improvement against other provinces. On contingent liabilities, yeah, Chair, it is a massive risk, but mainly in the Department of Health, and that contingency is growing. But there is a team now to try and deal with the long outstanding contingencies that are there and close some of the cases. Some have been lying there for quite a while. And obviously those that we needed to honour, we have paid. And again, in the adjustment budget, we'll be providing some money to health to deal with that. But it is a network that's out there, and I think that's been picked up. I think it's in Eastern Cape. But we're trying to make sure that we pay those that we know we don't have a case. Try and settle those out of court. If you cut off a finger instead of a leg, obviously we were at fault and we must deal with that and try and settle out of court. But it is still a big challenge. We've also engaged with the Office of the Premier and their legal team to help us in this process. I think they're better suited to deal with all these cases, and the State Attorney and how the State Attorney drags their feet to deal with our matters. And we also have the view that there may be collusion between our State Attorneys and the claimants, despite them being our lawyers. Or the state's lawyers, they're still private individuals that are appointed by the State Attorney. So there are issues that we're looking at, but we've given that to Office of the Premier to assist us and monitor that and take more control of those particular cases and not just leave it to the health legal team. On the conditional grant spending, yeah, Chair, I think as we reported, we've done a lot. We're monitoring that quite closely. We can ill afford to return money on conditional grants to the national fiscus. And again, without preempting the adjustment budget, we are returning money in this adjustment budget. And it's really saddened to see that. But we can just try and make sure that these bottlenecks don't happen. And I think as the Chair raised the education thing, on the HIV/AIDS grant, we were told that it's COVID. We didn't have, the schools were closed. We couldn't do this, we couldn't do that, which to us made sense at a high level, and we accepted that. But when we were compared to other provinces, those provinces made plans and spent that HIV/AIDS money on something else. And we did not do that. And that for that reason, we were at the bottom of the pile, and it was, for us, attending that meeting also was not very pleasant, in that, if I may say, the wool was probably pulled over our eyes, in that we were told it's COVID and they didn't have schools open, and we understood it as that. But when we saw the comparative analysis, other provinces spent around 97%, I think, and we were around 62%. So we have learned our lesson there also, not to just take it at face value, and rather try and do that comparative analysis with other provinces also before we just accept explanations that are given to us. On the SIU issue and the 41 companies, we are aware of the statement, Chair. We have not had sight of the actual report, but we have engaged with the Health HOD, and we've given her permission to appoint independent presiding officers or labour experts to deal with these matters, because within the department there's conflicts. And we just felt that we support her in that, and that we appoint an independent presiding officer to sit on these matters. And I know there's also a case against the HOD, and we'll extend that for the MEC to appoint an independent presiding officer in the HOD's matter that's come through this report. But as I say, we haven't had sight of the actual report. And we will try and follow that up, and I'm not sure if maybe the committee has had sight of that, but we will check with SIU whether that report can be shared with us, Chair. So there is action that's been taken there, and we have given permission to appoint independent, can we say, labour experts to deal with the investigation and preside over the matter. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, HOD. I think HOD had said much, and I think what I was supposed to really dwell on much on was the status of GAL, and I think HOD has already alluded to that. And I think the previous decisions or resolutions that have been taken by the House, but also by the portfolio committees on GAL, was firstly, we needed a turnaround strategy, which was not forthcoming for a long time. until the board, the previous board was dissolved, and a new board was. I think this time we've got a third board that has been appointed, which I think to some extent will be able to assist us in making sure that we are ultimately able to find an operator for the airport, because part of it was that let us take the airport to be run by those that have got the capacity to run it. Obviously, the department doesn't have sufficient nor the skills to actually, nor capacity to run the airport. So we are still at the same resolution that let us find somebody who can be able to run the airport for us, but also make sure that the airport is sustainable and it's able to sustain on its own without necessarily getting funds from the state. Unfortunately, because of the turn of events and the high turnover of the boards, that has not been able to be, achieved. But also, I think in terms of the administration itself, we had a lot of high turnover in terms of staff and so on, which we believe that at the moment it presents a better opportunity and platform for the department to be able to ensure that whoever is coming in has got the required skill and capacity to be able to take the airport to the next level. So we are just relying on the MEC and the board, but we are hoping that things will turn out better due to the caliber of board members that have presently been appointed, who have got at least some knowledge in terms of running the kind of institution like the airport. And I think the other one, issues of GNT and the pension fund, I think HOD has said much about that. And I think we just need to as well make sure that we're able to clarify, especially some of the areas where people think that there has been a lot of money that has been siphoned and so on. But yes, whatever that has happened, there should be consequences in terms of how the pension fund has been run and so on. And, it's painful, yes, for us, for the liquidation, especially when it's supported by the workers. But if you look at it as well, equally, I think it's much better that the workers decide what they want to do with the money that is actually in their pension fund, which I think perhaps they will decide how they invest it better, because it has not been satisfactory in terms of how it was necessarily safeguarded. I mean, it took us a very, very long time to even deal with the investigations itself. So I think we don't want to find ourselves as a province in that space again, where we have to investigate workers' pension fund and others even, pass on without necessarily getting what they're supposed to be earning from the money that has been saved for them for all this time when they were economically active. So I think it sets things better for us as government in terms of the liquidation. Yes, it has got its downside, but in order to make sure that workers are able to get what's due to them, I think it might be better. The only thing that needs to be done is to advise them as to how to better deal with their monies as they get them. It might not be all that we're supposed to get, but at least they will be able to get something. The only problem is that there are already hyenas waiting to pounce on them. Once the liquidation is completed, the workers get their money, hyenas will be at the door to make sure that the workers do not necessarily get their funds, as they will be led astray, most of them. You can see how some of these marches and the protests that are there is because there are hyenas who want the money to be released so that they can find a way of devouring this savings from the Workers' Pension Fund. Yeah, I think those are what I just wanted to emphasize, Chair, without belaboring the points that the HOD has already made. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Squad, MEC and HOD Brad, for those responses, straightforward and clarifying the issues that were raised. And as we said at the beginning, we don't intend to have a long meeting because generally our performance in the quarter we are dealing with and generally as a department is very good. And that's why we don't contradict ourselves, Honorable MEC Scott and HOD Brad, when we say this is the best performing department in this provincial government and one of the best performing provincial treasuries in the Republic of South Africa. So we hope you keep that up. Brad, you took the department from the section 100 days and pushed it until today when it is where we are. So thanks very much for those responses and for the work you are doing for the people of the province. We take this opportunity also to thank all members of the Limpopo Provincial Legislature, members of the Portfolio Committee on Provincial Treasury who attended and staff, and the team from Provincial Treasury. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, honourable members. Thanks, MEC. Thanks, colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Martina.
Thank you.